So hi, I'm Annemarie Gereis. I am the founder and also a consultant for Annemarie Gereis Consulting. My background is being in the visual effects industry, working as a compositor, but now transitioning over and doing my own business in career coaching, business consulting, helping people to get to where they want to go in the visual effects industry, whether it be on the personal development side or whether it be in the technical and artistic side of things. I'm here to help you get to where you want to go. Okay, so for me, my very first job was working at Cantina Creative. That particular role came from, honestly, loads and loads of conversations with people from the US, from Australia to the US. So I actually started in the industry just by having simple conversations with people about getting to know who they are, what their company was up to, and even just starting with understanding some of the programs and the way that their teams worked in the industry. And then from that, it was giving myself a deadline of, can I actually have 3 interviews and a coffee chat pretty much overseas. And once that was all put together, what I did was I traveled overseas, conducted all of them to then land a job with Cantina Creative. I would say from that experience, I learned sort of the value of relationships in our industry, and that I think it's a full circle moment to know that one of the companies I interviewed for out of those 3 was one of the last jobs I had in Los Angeles with Crafty Apes. So you just never know that your first couple of interviews could actually land you jobs later down the line as well. So I'd say the first couple of things to note is having work that really showcases your skills. So I think number 1 is if you're going to apologize for your work, you might as well actually take that particular segment and keep it out of your portfolio. But it's to really focus on the representation of your skill set. As long as you keep it fairly diverse and different sort of visual effects or animation work that speaks to the role you want, I would start there and put your top 1 first. I would always do a before and after for each particular kind of work, as well as labeling. Label what you've done. That's number 1 thing I tell everyone to do, because otherwise, if I look at your reel, I'm never gonna know what you're working on. And also keep it short. You don't need to make a 5-minute reel. Something like 1 minute to about 1 minute 30 is good enough. As long as I can get a really good gist of what you're doing, that's all I really need. And don't forget to also put your name and all your contact information at the start and at the end. You want to make it as simple and as easy for someone to hire you. So I'd say the most important thing in this industry, aside from having amazing visual effects skills, is that aspect of relationship building. I think a big part of it too is everyone talks about this industry being globally quite small and everyone knows each other. And I think a big part of that is the fact that our jobs are so collaboratively. You will always be working with multiple people. So it really pays to actually be kind and nice, as well as take an interest in someone's work. And I think part of it too is not thinking that you need to have these sort of grand conversations with people to try and get a job, but it's actually the reverse. Just start simply by starting a conversation. Find out what someone does and go from there. It doesn't necessarily have to be you pitching someone to get a job. A lot of the time you're building up your community around you, because you need that community in order to propel yourself forward into whatever role you want to do. And it's also a way of essentially getting more information and more data to make other decisions to do with your own career. I would say they tend to be the key sorts of ways in which to start out with building up your community, because really it's through your community that these opportunities do arise. And like I said, if you come back to that aspect of collaboration, this is where it all comes back to, is you're never working in isolation. You will always be working with others. That's actually a really good question. I would say there are so many different projects I've worked on, but I think the first thing to do, especially when you are starting out in the industry, is have a conversation with your supervisor. Like, don't think you have to do this alone. I think one part is like getting direction, because once you get that direction, like you will go from trying to guess and experiment to actually clearly knowing like the very first step. It's often when you get that very first step in what you need to do that you can then plan, well, what goes next and what goes next. I mean, even tonight when we talked a lot about, I suppose, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. shot, where it was a key turning point of like the character in the helmet. It wasn't really up until the point where my supervisor would constantly come back to me and we would re-chat about the position of the face in the helmet. And he would give me tips of like, well, why don't you use the eye distort? Or like, why don't you try like grid warp? Like, it might work a little better here, and like, let's have different variations. Like, have a conversation. If you don't know where to start, it's better to like ask. And it's better to also just even start with one step. You don't need to have 20 steps out there. Sometimes it's just having that very first step very clear, and then you are able to build momentum from that. So I would say one of the most memorable projects that I got to work on was the Guardians of the Galaxy project. This was my second project that I'd ever worked on at Cantina Creative. This particular project, I think, really spoke to the fact that like I had arrived as a visual effects artist. So I had that opportunity to work on several shots where you saw the main character Yondu speaking to Star-Lord on the other side, and it was essentially like a screen on one side of the room and Star-Lord standing next to that particular screen and having the conversation. I'd say this shot was really memorable because it was the first time that I actually worked with the creative director, Steven, to be able to create the consistent look or the consistent color grade for about 15 shots, for which we then submitted to Marvel. And the idea was that our team had done the motion graphics for it, and me as the compositor had worked to actually integrate it into each of these plexiglasses. But I had never been at that stage invited to look at several shots and actually create the consistency for about 15 shots, which then was the very last point in which we did together to be able to then submit it to Marvel to be put into the movie. So I thought that was a very special moment with that particular person who I worked with. Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. And it's funny because I think all creators on all spectrums who do creative things actually face creative burnout. I'm talking from like not just like visual effects artists, but even to YouTube creators or even writers or anyone that really does work with their passion as part of the delivery process. And I think the number one thing is have good friends around you who can actually notice it for you. Number two is, with creative burnout, you need to do the opposite of what you're doing. So often your burnout will actually sort of put you in a mindset of wanting to work more and to do more. And that will feel like you're solving something internally, but actually you're not. It's actually, sometimes it can dip into your self-worth. And a lot of the time it's actually doing the opposite of what you think you're meant to be doing, which is you need to stop or slow down. Okay, so I think with the future of VFX, it's going to look, I think it will evolve over the next couple of years. I think we're at this stage right now, especially with artificial intelligence, where we are going to see a lot of change within a brief amount of time. But I do think at the same time, we're at this stage where it is a great co-collaborator. And I think, honestly, just talking to people who deal with a lot of the tools is that we're at this stage where I think we're going to have two ways of doing things. I think we're going to have the people that enjoy working with the tools and creating it from the ground up. And we're also going to have this other set of ideas where it's going to be part of the software and it's going to be a seamless, almost like a seamless way or an integration of having those tool sets there that are behind the scenes. And that if you choose to use them, they're sort of automated to work to how you choose to work. So I think we're going to have more options of how we choose to work in the future. And in terms of jobs, I think this is the one that people bring up a lot. I think we're going to see an evolution of how jobs are going to be in the future. I even see it now too. I see some posts where there is hiring of like different prompters or hiring of different developers to help people create some of this like art using different data sets. But I think we're just going to have more options and more tools, and how we choose to use them is really up to us and the individual company and the individual teams. I think personally, we're just going to have more options for where we're headed at for right now. But on the flip side to it too, like we won't really get to see this until the actual tool sets itself move from emerging to actually be like present in those particular softwares or more commonly used at those studios. And that's when I think we will see, right, what is the next stage of visual effects? It's so important to focus on some of these soft skills, which I called out as resilience, adaptability, and sort of the ability to essentially be open to want to learn, to take on feedback. And a big part of that is because the tools will always change. I mean, we're seeing changes even now, and that if we're not open to that, it's going to be really hard for us to move along with the tool sets. But it's not only that, it's the fact that like, when you're going through something challenging or when you're going through something tough, this is where you can go back to like, well, why do you do what you do? And so you can go back to what that greater purpose that you have is in the industry. So it drives you forward and it helps you to like stay focused on what it is that that got you into this industry in the first place. So it's really important that you create that why for yourself and also practice, like I was saying, resilience, adaptability, openness, like practice those three things. They're a muscle. They don't just happen overnight. People are not just born with them. It's a muscle here. You have to practice those three particular characteristics.